Is ISIL really defeated? US-backed forces declare victory after seizing the group's final stronghold in Syria. How will that shape the end of the war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. ISIL once controlled territory in Syria and Iraq equivalent to the size of Great Britain and imposed its version of Islamic rule on millions. Well, ISIL fighters were finally defeated in Iraq 2 years ago, and it appears their dream of a so-called caliphate in Syria is over too. US-backed fighters declared what they call the 100% territorial defeat of ISIL after winning the battle for Barghouz. Following weeks of intense fighting, Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces raised their flag over the final Syrian town under ISIL control.
We announced the end of our military campaign. With this victory, we congratulate the Kurdish, Arab and Christian nations. We've defeated the Islamic State from the face of the earth.
Well, thousands of people who escaped the fighting are stranded in refugee camps. Let's hear now from Imran Khan, who takes a look at the rise and fall of ISIL.
This is what the end of ISIL's self-declared caliphate looks like. Those who fled ISIL's last enclave, Barghouz village in northeastern Syria, say it's not the end of the state in the way ISIL intended. Rather, it's just the last place where ISIL members offered any kind of coordinated resistance.
ISIL doesn't want any families to leave. We have tried more than one time and we were unsuccessful until yesterday. The situation under siege is bad with lack of food. Our children are hungry. Our food had finished plus the shelling mortars. And clashes mean so many people had died. Those that survived are hungry and desperate.
The state that ISIL intended, one that allowed them to generate revenue through taxation and oil sales and to be able to pass laws, was defeated in July 2017, according to the Iraqi government. That's when ISIL was pushed out of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul. At the same time, Syrian Democratic Forces, backed by coalition airstrikes, mounted an operation against the group's last major stronghold, the city of Raqqa in Syria. ISIL lost that battle in October the same year. Now all that remains of the group is pockets of fighters confined to small areas in Iraq and Syria. Analysts say the decline for ISIL began with its attempt to take a town on the Syrian-Turkish border in September 2014. That's Kobani over there. The siege of Kobani on the Turkey-Syria border is considered to be a turning point in the battle against ISIL. Turkey were very worried that they'd managed to get this close to the Turkish border, so they allowed both the Kurdish Peshmerga and Free Syrian Army forces to use their territory to go into Kobani. And in conjunction with the YPG, they were able to force ISIL fighters from the outskirts of the town. For many, it's considered the beginning of the end for ISIL's caliphate. In just a few short years, ISIL lost its territory and by the end of 2017 stopped referring to the caliphate. In 2019, the group still represents a major threat, however. By using supporters outside of Iraq and Syria, the group has turned to social media to get its message across. But platforms like Facebook and Twitter have closed thousands of ISIL-related accounts. The group now uses secure, instant messaging apps.
Things like Telegram really have taken centre stage. So if you're kind of self-respecting jihadi, you probably are on Telegram, because that's where all groups, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or HTS, that's where they all share the vast majority of their propaganda. It's where the key conversations are happening.
It's surprised many that the US President Donald Trump has now declared the end of the caliphate, saying he's simply playing to his domestic audience. There's more concern about ISIL fighters that remain in Iraq and Syria and what they might be planning for the future. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera on the Turkey-Syria border.
Okay, let's take this on now. Let's bring in our guests. Joining me right here on set, we have Marwan Kabalan. He's the head of policy analysis at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Over in Athens, we have Judit Neurink. She's a journalist and author of the book, The War on ISIS, On the Road to the Caliphate. And in Atlanta, we have Mia Bloom. She's a professor at Georgia State University and author of the forthcoming book, Small Arms, Children and Terrorism. Welcome to you all. Marwan, I'd like to start with you here in the studio. So we have this last piece of ISIL territory reclaimed, but what happens now? Is ISIL finished? Is ISIL diminished? Is it rebuilding? What threat does ISIL present now?
Well, I think we have to be cautious now. I think it's a little bit early to celebrate the end of ISIL as an ideology. It may have actually finished as a territorial entity, but I think as an ideology is still very much alive, in my opinion, because I believe that if we don't tackle the root causes which had in the first place led to the emergence of ISIL, I think we are going to see a comeback, because so far we have seen like 3 generations of jihadists, starting from Afghanistan 1979 until the end of the Soviet invasion there in the early 1990s. And then we have seen the second generation of jihadists after the US occupation of Iraq. And then ISIL, in my opinion, is the 3rd generation of jihadists. And ISIL emerged, in fact, as a reaction to the sectarian policies of Iran, the al-Maliki government in Iraq, and the heavy-handed security approach which Syrian President Bashar al-Assad used against the protesters at the very early stages of the Syrian revolution. So unless we deal with these issues, I think ISIL will still alive.
Okay,
very much alive.
So Mia Bloom, is that your view as well? Do you think we haven't seen it completed yet, it's not over yet?
I think Marwan is absolutely correct. I think we have to disaggregate. There are 2 ISIS phenomena. There's a phenomena of ISIS that is a territorial entity that is no more. But then the issue of the ideology and the spread of its popularity, especially on social media, is something that we can't ignore. You can't bomb an ideology out of existence the way you can the territorial strongholds that ISIS is no longer in control.
You follow, Mia, the ISIL propaganda. You've studied it. You focus on it. What sense do you have? Is the ISIL franchise, despite this setback to them, is the franchise still growing?
The franchise is definitely still in existence. There was a period of time after the loss of Mosul that we saw a real decline in the number of media offices that ISIS was issuing its propaganda. On the daily collection that we do at Georgia State University, we saw a real downturn. And then about a month and a half ago, a bunch of new channels began to emerge. You had in the segment beforehand, Mr. Cooper was saying the Telegram is being used extensively. And so not only is it Telegram, but we're seeing other platforms, other encrypted platforms that are being tested for ISIS distribution of its material. And after the Christchurch massacre in the 2 mosques last week, Abu Hassan al-Muhajir, who had not been heard of since September 2018, reemerged to issue a 44-minute audio tape to encourage people to rise up and take revenge for the massacres that had happened by a white terrorist in New Zealand.
Right. Well, ideology is clearly something that needs to be tackled. That's something we're going to come to a little bit later in the program. But Judit, Neurink, let's look at the situation with ISIL on the ground. What degree of organization is there left on the ground in Syria? It was a well-disciplined and battle-hardened force. Where have all these fighters gone?
All over the place, to be quite honest. We know that there is a number of pockets, both in Iraq and in Syria, not only in the border area, but also a bit deeper into Iraq. There's people that are active with all the guerrilla tactics that we knew Al-Qaeda before of and ISIS in the beginning. So they kidnap people, they ambush cars, they ambush checkpoints, just about weekly and sometimes even more. In Iraq, you get these kind of reports. There's a lot of activity still around. There are some people that say that there is about 15,000 fighters still around in Iraq and Syria. And where they are, we don't really know exactly, although we know that there are pockets.
And in terms of recruitment for future members of ISIL, this loss of the Caliphate unit, this beacon, if you like, to many that helped rule thousands of fighters, and now it's gone. How does ISIL explain that away to potential recruits when you'd think they'd be disillusioned, wouldn't you?
What people are looking forward to is that there is a caliphate, which is the place where all the Muslims want to be, this new, beautiful new state. Now that is gone. So, but that's not the only thing. The ideology, the Salafi ideology, is still there amongst radical Sunni Muslims in Iraq. And ISIS had quite a following amongst them. It was not just that people were following them because they were going to get them back into power. It's also religious, and that religious aspect is still there.
Marwan, you want to come in?
Well, I think it's very much like a déjà vu for me, because we have seen this many times before. We have seen it, for example, after the end of the Afghan war, when the Arab Afghanis, they actually made it back home after the end of the Afghan war. And also, we have seen it one more time when the United States invaded Afghanistan, when these jihadists also scattered almost all over the world. And then they grouped again in Iraq after 2003. And now, actually, after destroying the Caliphate in Syria, I fear that many of those fighters actually will be making it back home to their own countries, because don't forget that after all, the bulk of ISIL fighters actually are foreigners, and we have some from Europe, some from the former Soviet republics, some from Arab countries, almost everywhere. We have at least 80 nationalities within ISIL ranks and files. So I believe that some of them will make it back home, and they're going to create problems for their own countries. And now, in my opinion, whereas ISIL has been, in fact, the territorial entity of ISIL has been destroyed in Syria, now the hunt is going to be for those actually who have survived, and they are going to strike back, in my opinion, because, as I said earlier, unless you deal with the root causes of this phenomena, we are not going to see the real end of it.
Okay, Mia Bloom, Marwan was just referring there to the experience in Iraq, and what do we learn from that experience? Because ISIL was defeated, back in 2017 in Iraq, but the group then evolved and kind of reinvented itself.
Well, there's two things. The fact that every time one of these jihadi groups metastasizes, there's a period of time where they recede, and they are planning, they are recruiting, they're getting ready for the next iteration. And so ISIS stems from the defeat of al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2005 and 2006. But I think it's also important to add to what Marwan and Ms. Neurink said, is part of ISIS's ideology of the apocalypse does predict that there's a period of time where they have to recede back into the desert, that there's a period of time where Dabiq is destroyed and then they reemerge. And so it's not completely inconsistent with the way in which ISIS has predicated its ideology of, like the phoenix emerging from the ashes, it will come back. It's also very important that we know that many of the young people who were born or brought to the Caliphate, the so-called Ashbal al-Khilafa, the cubs of the Caliphate, will be trained, prepared, brainwashed into thinking that in the future there will be another iteration for ISIS and they will be able to fight again.
Right, so yes, exactly that. You have thousands of children who have been indoctrinated from a young age, Mia. So how do you take that on? How do you try and de-radicalize them?
I mean, there's really good templates that we have from different countries that have introduced de-radicalization programs for children. The first thing to take into account is, I personally don't believe that children are radical so much as that they've been brainwashed and they parrot what the adults around them have said. But there's a fantastic program in Pakistan where the Pakistani Taliban had kidnapped children and had brainwashed them to train them, many of whom to be suicide bombers. And this program has been very successful. It's called Sabaun, which is dawn's first rays of light. And what they do is they pair not just vocational training, but also they teach them the proper form of Islam, which repudiates violence. And then they also have social workers and therapists to treat the children's post-traumatic stress disorder. So you have to have a multi-pronged approach. But as you can imagine, this is a very detailed program. It's a little bit expensive. It's about $30,000 per child. And so because it's a Pakistani program funded by the Pakistani government of Pakistani children, there really isn't the kind of confusion we will have with the children of ISIS, because no one wants to take responsibility for these kids, either the countries in which they are present now or from maybe the countries that their parents come from. Very complicated, and there's not the political will to take these children in and try to give them a better future. Okay, so children is one thing, a very important thing. Judit, what about those dispersed, those thousands, tens of thousands of dispersed fighters just all over the place? How do you keep the pressure up on them to stop them acting in the way that they might?
Well, what is happening in Iraq is that the military is active still the whole time, trying to find them. And we do get reports the whole time of sleeper cells being found, even weapon depots being found, little factories still. It's still out there. How do you get these people to change their mind is a very difficult problem in Iraq also, because the problems that were there when ISIS came in 2014, they are still there. The sectarian problems between the Shiites and the Sunnis have not gone away. Actually, they have only grown, because it's the Sunnis that have mostly suffered from what happened. Their cities are still in ruins. There's not enough money coming from Baghdad to rebuild them. So there's a lot of people, and you see it more and more after more than a year of no ISIS. People are dissatisfied. They are angry with their government. This week in Mosul, there was an accident with a ferry in which more than 100 people died. This is not people going to the person who was running the ferry. No, they go to the authorities. They want the governor to go. They say it's all because of the corruption. So there is now finally talk that the governor might go, that also the Shiite militias that are still active in all these Sunni towns, that they might have to go. And that then perhaps there will be some kind of normality coming back. But it takes time, and it takes money, and it takes will. And the problem here, I think, is mainly, is there enough political will to solve this and to get Iraq back on its feet? Right. Marwan, what Judit is exploring there is it makes it sound as if it's not just a difficult problem, it's nigh on impossible.
Absolutely. It's really important what Judit has just said. I think we need to look at ISIL not only as an ideology. Part of ISIL is an ideology, but the other part is protest. We need to look at it as a violent protest movement against certain realities on the ground. And I think the military and security approach is not the remedy for ISIL. We cannot actually eliminate ISIL by only using military force. We have to have another approach that is, I know the Americans are not really good in that nation building, but I think we have to think about it, because ISIL was actually very much successful in recruiting people from within the Sunni community in Syria and in Iraq, because of what Judit has said. This community has been excluded, marginalized, has not been actually given any share in power and wealth, has been dealt with in a very violent way by the government of Nouri al-Maliki and the government of Bashar al-Assad.
You talk about the United States and nation building there. I mean, this battle to take down the Caliphate has cost billions of dollars, isn't it? And one just wonders if we saw the same amount of investment into going into nation building, or rebuilding in this case, that might just help do the trick.
Absolutely, but I don't think President Trump is going for that, because, you know, he's not very much into this nation building. I think he has already expressed his willingness actually to withdraw from Syria as soon as this war ends. And we still need to know, of course, what the American strategy is going to be in Syria after the defeat of ISIL, because there is no clear U.S. strategy. I mean, sometimes Trump says that he he wants to withdraw, and then he decides to keep some troops on the ground. But at the end of the day, the Americans are not really good in this nation building, and we have seen Iraq actually. They are really good in war and in blowing things up, but when it comes to nation building, I think they have very poor performance here.
Okay, Mia, what role do you think the United States and the international community should play in this?
Well, I think Marwan is absolutely right. The president hasn't been consistent, and he has withdrawn all the funds that were originally allocated to Syria. The ideal situation would be a kind of Marshall Plan for the Middle East, what you saw after World War II, in that the United States helped rebuild Europe. But at the same time, just to play devil's advocate, we have to look at the billions of dollars that have been sent to Afghanistan and have not had a positive impact. And so nation building and the investment in nation building requires to have local partners on the ground who aren't going to be entirely corrupt and using this money to benefit themselves and enrich themselves rather than helping the people. Because in the end, you can pour money into a country, but if it's not going to be allocated properly, the rank and file, people on the street aren't going to ever see it, and it really doesn't address some of the root causes that Marwan pointed to. As far as the United States is concerned, I think it's a very challenging situation given the president's biases and the fact that we still haven't properly called what happened in New Zealand last week a terrorist attack.
Yeah, and Judit, these new realities on the ground that are a consequence of the Caliphate being dismantled, it presents all sorts of difficulties, doesn't it? Not least the various disparate groups that have been involved in eliminating ISIL, Turkish groups, Kurdish groups, Shia militia and so forth. What happens now? What happens to them? They were united in that, but they're not united in anything else.
No, the problem, of course, is that those militias, they have been armed. They're going to go back home. In Iraq, officially, part of the militias have gone into the military, into the army. But most boys have gone home, and they don't have work, which is the next problem that Iraq is facing. And also, you see that these Shiite groups are now fighting between each other. And you are really seeing in Iraq now the divide between those that are supporting or supported by Iran and those that are not. There have been already offices closed of one side. So this is going to be a big conflict within the Shiites. And then, of course, back to the fact that we have all these cities that are not built. We also have big groups of people that still are in tents, in camps. Not only the Yazidis, who have been badly hit, who still haven't been found, all of them. We still have about 1,000 Yazidi boys and girls and women that are missing, that had been kidnapped by ISIS. 2 million people still without houses because they cannot go back home.
I'm just going to jump in there because we're just about to run out of time. We've got about 45 seconds left. Marwan, what do you think this means, this dismantling of the Caliphate? What does it mean for the war in Syria now?
Well, I think it doesn't mean that this is the end of the Syrian conflict. I believe there is going to be another round of conflict in Syria, and we are going to see the regional and international powers actually competing even more. We have seen recently Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State in the region, calling for to put more pressure on Iran in Syria and also in Iraq. Probably we are going to see more competition between these different players, Turkey, Iran, the US, Russia, and Israel as well. So this is one phase ended, but we are going to see much more from the Syrian conflict.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you to all our guests, Marwan, Kabalan, Judit, Neurink, and Mia Bloom. We've run out of time. Do appreciate your perspectives on this. Thanks very much. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And of course, for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, it's goodbye for now.